I'm Iris Ruth Pastor, and with me today for a little small talk is Dr. Joel Hoffman, and he's the author of And God Said. And Dr. Hoffman will be the scholar in residence at Congregation Beth Am here in Tampa on Friday, March 26th through Sunday, March 28th. Welcome, Dr. Hoffman.
Thank you very much. It's a treat to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's also, I have to admit, a little intimidating. Before we begin chatting, I just want to acquaint our listeners with your background so they can be intimidated too. And I understand that you have a PhD in linguistics, that you're a translator, that you're a biblical scholar, you're an author. You also write a column on Hebrew for the Jerusalem Post. You also are a professor at Brandeis and at Hebrew Union College. And the most interesting thing is that you're the son of Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman, and I understand that you studied together.
We studied together, and in fact, he is the winner of the National Jewish Book Award because the book to which I contributed was edited by him.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, it's called My People's Prayer Book. So
it's genetic. There's a genetic link there.
I guess so.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the book. And you said in the beginning of the book that it was about the Bible, and God Said was about the Bible and its translation, and that you thought you were a perfect match to write this book. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I hope I didn't say that I was a perfect match to write the book. I hope that I toned it down a little bit. I guess the background is that there are two different kinds of people who generally do Bible study. One of them are people who approach it only from the point of view of the Bible, and what they know is the Bible. So they'll study Hebrew, or for the New Testament, they'll study Greek. For the Aramaic books, they'll study Aramaic, and that's what they end up knowing, and that's really all they focus on. And that's by far the largest group of Bible scholars. On the other side of the equation, there are people who sort of study language and study linguistics, and they tend not to do a lot of work on the Bible. So there's that sort of middle area where they merge that I think is a void. And that's, I think, where I come in, because my background is in linguistics. My PhD is in theoretical linguistics. And again, you mentioned because I grew up in a rabbinic home, I grew up with an appreciation for the Bible and studying the Bible. So putting those two together, I'm offering what I believe is the first really scientific look at the language of the Bible.
Okay, so in my book, you're pretty perfectly matched for that. So that's my quote on you. But what I wanted to ask you about, because you talk a lot about mistranslations, and that you said mistranslations can often conceal meaning, and I was wondering, you mentioned in the book, in your book, a book like Water for Chocolate, which many of us have read, and I, for one, have never understood the title. And I was wondering if you could give a little background on that, because I think that sheds light on what mistranslations are and how they can really skewer what you think.
Well, I think it's a perfect example for two reasons. First of all, it shows my general approach, which is to look at language and then apply what we know about language to the Bible, rather than only looking at the narrow field of the Bible. So in this case, we look at something in Spanish where we can actually ask people who speak Spanish and see if we've got it right. Because if we're just looking at the Bible, the only people who really know the answer, unfortunately, died a long time ago. And so we can't see if our theory is exactly right. In the case of like Water for Chocolate, and I have to admit, I've only very quickly skimmed the book. I did not actually read the whole thing. But I was intrigued by the title, because when I think of like Water for Chocolate, nothing comes to mind.
Exactly.
It's not an image that provokes anything particular in my mind. You know, the only thing I could think of was a family that was too poor to have chocolate, and so all they had was water. It was like Water for Chocolate. I don't know what you think of when you think of the title, but in Spanish, the title makes a lot of sense. In Spanish, at least the tradition that this book was written in, there's a notion that the way you prepare hot chocolate is with water that is almost but not quite boiling. That if it's boiling, it will scald the chocolate, but it has to be hot. And so the water that is for chocolate is water that is almost but not quite boiling. And so like Water for Chocolate is a situation that is about to boil over, we might say in English. You're at the boiling point.
And that sheds light on what the the meaning of the whole story was. And I felt very cheated, having read the story many years ago, that I didn't know what the title was. So it really made this whole idea of mistranslations a lot more relevant. So that was why I wanted you to talk about that example. Another thing that you brought up in your book, which I thought was fascinating, is you talk about word plays, and you talk about why do we park on a driveway and why do we drive on a parkway? And the one I absolutely went crazy over was, why when a house burns up do we say it burns down? So I think there can be so much confusion over these types of things. And the other one that I thought was interesting is when you talk about if you're just translating it word for word, how it can be so misleading. And you brought up the example of the phrase out of sight, out of mind. And if you translated that literally, it would mean blind idiot. So I think those are tantalizing examples of how we can get so sidetracked, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, once again, you've already brought up the examples, so that's great. And essentially, the reason I use those examples, and actually my personal favorite is the drive-through window, which if you don't know what that is, it could be a massive misunderstanding there. And the reason I bring those up is that a lot of the translations of the Bible are as bad as saying blind idiot for out of sight, out of mind. That's how wrong they are. So, to call them misleading is true, but it's almost an understatement.
Could you give me an example in the Bible that speaks to what we just talked about?
Well, I'll give you one example. Most translators do step past it, but there's a well-known phrase, Ma tovu o halecha Yaakov. Tovu actually means were good, though we normally translate it as are good. O halecha Yaakov is your tense Jacob. Everyone knows the word ma. Ma means what? But the wrong translation clearly of that phrase is what good are your tents, Jacob? That's not how it works in Hebrew. So there's an example of you have to look at what the Hebrew does, not just what the Hebrew is.
I also wanted to know if people wanted more information on this topic, where do they go?
For more information about the book, they can go to the book's website, which is andgodsaid.com. It's obviously one word. I also moderate a blog about Bible translation, and that's called goddidn'tsaythat.com. So they can go to one or both of those for information about the book or more general information about Bible translation.
I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and also for shedding light on a very fascinating topic. And you really gave such concrete examples of everyday life that it was very clear to be able to understand the importance of accurate translation. So I appreciate that very much. And for more information on the Scholar in Residence Weekend with Dr. Joel Hoffman, please contact Congregation Beth Am, and it's 968-8511, and the area code is 813, or you can go to www.cbatampa.com. I'm Iris Ruth Pastor, and this has been a Let My People Know Outreach Engagement Initiative. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.